Welcome to the Let Them Live podcast with Emily Burning, a place for meaningful conversations, real stories, and a shared mission to protect life.
Thank you so much, Dr. New, for joining me to have this conversation. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself really quick to everyone watching and listening, and then we'll get into all the nitty gritty.
Sure. I'm Michael New. I'm an assistant professor of practice here at the Bush School of Business at the Catholic University of America. I teach economics. I'm also a senior associate scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute, the research and education arm of Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. I do a lot of writing and research on kind of the social science of the pro-life movement. I write about abortion trends, pro-life laws, contraception programs, public opinion, lots of fun at cocktail parties. I also head up a pro-life sidewalk ministry outside the DC Planned Parenthood. So that's what I
Yeah.
do.
You do a little bit of everything, which I love, which is why I wanted to have you on. You are such a unique voice in the pro-life movement because, like you said, not only are you an academic and you talk about all of the abortion trends and kind of the research side of things, but you also are boots on the ground sidewalk advocate, which I love. So, can you tell us just to start about some of the degrees that you hold, and what first inspired you to I don't know, apply that high level academic training that you have specifically to abortion research in the pro-life movement?
Great question. Went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, but when I was in high school, abortion was not on my radar screen. I was scrambling around, involved in all kinds of activities, trying to get good grades, trying to get to a good college. I do remember in 11th grade, I did get a chance to watch the film The Silent Scream in a religion class. And if your viewers are unaware of this film, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who at one point was a leading abortion doctor in New York City, he was able to videotape an ultrasound of an abortion being done. And it's a very graphic image of what happens. And it did inspire many to the pro life cause. And I watched this video and I was disgusted by it, but I didn't run to the barricades and start doing pro life work. It just seemed like a crummy thing in a world full of crummy things, but probably did plant some seeds. So, undergrad, I go to Dartmouth College. And freshman year, I kind of bounce off the walls a bit. I wasn't real happy with a lot of things there. The only thing I really enjoyed about my freshman year at Dartmouth were some conservative political groups I got involved with. And at some point, during my freshman year, I would comfortable kind of identifying myself as pro-life. Sophomore year rolls around, and I remember this well. I was sitting at mass, and I don't remember what the homily was about that day, but something hit me like a ton of bricks. Abortion is a really important issue. This is like paying the capital gains tax or term limits or the idea of the week. This is life and death. This is important. And you should be doing something about it. Well, I'm an 18, 19-year-old college sophomore. What can I do? Maybe start a campus group. So I approached my priest and I tell him I'd like to start a pro life group. And he told me there's another student already working on it. Why don't you work with him? I didn't know this individual, but I looked him up, sent him an email. We got a group off the ground and, we never looked back. This is the mid 1990s. Students for Life of America was not, in existence yet. We kind of were left to our own devices, but we wrote op-eds, we wrote letters, we wrote speakers to campus. We did the best we could. My senior year was interesting. There was a group called Ivy League Coalition for Life. There were active pro-life chapters at Wellesley, Princeton, Dartmouth, and Fairfield in Connecticut. And we hosted a conference, spring of my senior year, June or May of 1997. And I remember that we actually got Alan Keyes to come. One nice thing about Dartmouth is in New Hampshire, everyone's running for president. Presidential candidates and people interested in running for president will often come to your campus. And he gave a really good talk. And the neat thing about that talk was it was the same weekend that Dartmouth was hosting some prospective African American students. And we hear internally that some of the messages they receive are very polarizing, very divisive. But all those perspectives came to our event. So they got to hear an uplifting message I thought was good. So I was glad that worked out the way it did. So grad school, I go off to Stanford. And I was still interested in pro life work and the pro life issue. But in academia, there's kind of a herd mentality. You research what the important people research. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, I didn't see a lot of people in political science researching
Mhm.
abortion. So
Sure.
my dissertation dealt with fiscal policy, direct democracy, fiscal limits. Those are things that I worked on. That's what I did my dissertation on. After 5 years at Stanford, they gave me a PhD, and I was very proud of that accomplishment. And I then go off to Harvard to start a 2-year fellowship there. And a lot of my dissertation dealt with like state politics and state policy outcomes. And as someone who is interested in the pro life movement, this is the early 2000s, pro lifers worked hard to pass a lot of, incremental laws. We tried to
Mhm.
stop state Medicaid programs from funding abortion. We passed parental involvement laws, required minor girls to either notify their parents for obtaining an abortion or get permission from their parents for obtaining an abortion. We passed informed consent laws that give women seeking abortion information about health risks, field
Yep.
development, sources of support for pregnant women and single mothers. And I was kind of wondering, we're puffing and puffing. Do these laws actually do any good? Are we actually saving lives? And I didn't see a lot of research on this question. So I started a new research project at Harvard, kind of looking at the impact of the state level pro life laws. And one reason why there wasn't much research at the time is it was very difficult to get a good data set of what states had passed what laws at what time. At that time, the only group that really tracked this was NARAL, National Abortion Rights Action League. They would have a pamphlet called Who Decides. It would list all the states and any pro-life laws they might have passed that year. NARAL didn't really have an online archive. They had the current year, but not past years. So I was kind of stalling out this project. And I found out in a very roundabout way that NARAL actually willed away a lot of their archives to Harvard. So I went to the women's library and filled out some paperwork. It was all right there waiting for me. And that got
Wow.
this research project started. So I did a study on the impact of state level pro life laws and found that, yeah, most of the things we do have some effect. If you stop tax free funding of abortion through Medicaid, that gets abortion numbers down. Parental involvement laws lower minor abortion rates. Informed consent laws do some incremental good getting abortion numbers down. So I was hoping to get a study out by 2003, the 30th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. I was not plugged in. I emailed some people somewhat haphazardly. I didn't get much of a response. But I was very lucky because that spring, Harvard did a visiting fellow program. And one of the visiting fellows was a guy named Stuart Butler, who was the vice president of domestic policy at the Heritage Foundation. And he was doing a seminar on healthcare policy. So I went to Stuart's seminar. I made friends with him. I had lunch with him. I pitched him the idea. Would Heritage Foundation want to do a study on the impact of pro life laws? There was interest, but there was also some tension that Heritage focused on economic issues and foreign policy. They did not do much on social issues. They'd never done a study on abortion before. So they really felt they do this has to be right. So they had an intern that summer of 2003, reconstruct my whole data set from scratch to make sure I didn't make any mistakes. And this
Mm.
intern found a couple very minor errors, but found that my numbers hold up and there's good statistical evidence these laws work. So March for Life 2004, that January, that day, they released a study, and it gets a great response. And I kind of thought the pro label would come by and pat me on my head and shake my hand. Nice study, young man. Good work. Keep fighting the good fight. No, this thing really took off. I'm getting all kinds of invitations to write and speak. And one thing I just didn't really realize was the pro life movement did not have its own kind of in house social scientist. We had bioethicists, we had theologians, we had public health experts. We did not really have a social scientist. So I'm like, Michael, this is what you're trained to do. You have a PhD in political science from Stanford. You have a mastery in statistics also from Stanford. This is what you're trained to do. Put this to, work to build a culture of life, build the kingdom. So I just
Yeah.
kept doing writing and research. National Review Online took an interest in what I had to say. I became kind of a regular commentator there. I was invited to different conferences to speak. I get to be on radio shows and great podcasts like this one. So that's my story.
I love that. No, I think it's really amazing because you're using something that's very specific to yourself. We all have to use our time and our talents for God's kingdom. So I love that you're doing that. Let's get into the research a little bit. One of my questions is, has there ever been a research finding that challenged one of your own assumptions or forced you to kind of rethink something that you've previously believed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, over time as I've done research on pro-life laws, um, I've become a little skeptical of the impact of some of the informed consent laws. We have a very good data set on Medicaid funding, and that's a very solid finding. Everyone who has looked at this seriously finds that if you start covering abortion in your state Medicaid program, abortions go up. Guttmacher, which really tries to play down the impact of public policy, they acknowledge this. There's also a pretty good, body of research on parental involvement laws. Informed consent laws are trickier just because they come in some different flavors. Some are just kind of, more neutral and don't really give a lot of information. Some do give women information about, colored pamphlets that include field development, that include information about, source support for pregnant women. Some require women to make 2 visits to an abortion facility. Sometimes that dissuades a lot of women that if a woman lives in a rural area, sometimes that
Mhm.
is a real cost that, they have to incur. So I don't necessarily find that, every last informed consent law has a big impact. It kind of depends on timing and circumstance, and they have to be enforced properly. So as life has gone on, I've kind of, that's one thing that I've discovered.
Okay, that's kind of cool. I mean, you do approach it with maybe a healthy skepticism when there are new laws, and it's very interesting that you're able to kind of look at these and say, "Hey, like, is this actually making an impact?" Which is what the pro-life movement at large really wants to know. We want to know if the things that we're doing and the money and the time that we're investing in making this a pro-life culture is actually working. Um, One of my other questions, just to keep on kind of the data of everything, is how do you respond when people say that abortion is too emotional of an issue for data to actually matter? Because I think it's a lot when you hear about abortion, it's a lot about stories and my cousin did this and my sister did this. And of course, it's an emotional thing, but why does the data matter? And why is it not too emotional an issue for it to matter?
Obviously, anecdotes can be emotional, and the issue can be emotional, but data is numbers, and there's legitimate statistical techniques that we can use to analyze data, and we can make judgments based on that about what strategies are effective. Our resources are scarce. And I don't want to see pro-life people investing a lot of time, effort, and energy into things that probably at the end of the day just won't matter much. So, I think that we can certainly compare different kind of legislative strategies and make some, I think, prudent decisions about what the best path to follow is. I also think it's important, we'll probably get into this more later on, just to track and document the progress we've made. One
Yeah.
thing I tell pro-life audiences constantly is that long term, we've made a lot of progress. We've done a lot better than we think we have. Between 1980 and 2017, with Roe v. Wade on the books and abortion legal in all 50 states throughout all 9 months of pregnancy, we still succeeded in cutting the abortion rate in half of this country. We cut the abortion rate
Wow.
by more than 50%. If the abortion rate today was what it was at 1980 peak, there'd be a million more abortions taking place every year. So by just getting involved politically, electing people, passing laws, sidewalk counseling, prayer, educational efforts, pregnancy help centers, we spare a million women for a lifetime of regret every year, and we save a million children every year. So I think numbers and data are very good just in terms of tracking our overall progress.
No, I 100% agree. I think it's important too because it's not really something that can be argued. It's a true north, I guess. Data is and information is for something as important as this. One of the questions I've been very excited to ask you is what is one abortion related claim that gets repeated so often that people assume it's true, even though the data says otherwise, or multiple? Because I do feel like maybe there are some abortion claims out there that are refuted by data, but they keep getting spread.
One claim I hear a lot that just gets on my nerves is that, pro-life laws have no impact. And sometimes the other side of these studies that are like global or international, and they'll compare abortion rates from countries, around the world. And they'll find that, in a place like Sweden or Finland where abortion is legal, maybe they have a lower abortion rate than certain, you know, countries in Africa or Middle East or South America where the preborn are protected. And they say, oh, the laws don't matter. Well, there's a big difference between like, Sweden and Tanzania. I mean, I'm sorry that a lot of these countries that have pro-life protections in place, also have, their countries in Africa, Middle East, South America. They have higher poverty rates. They have worse public health. They have certain, pathologies that might increase the perceived demand for abortion. when you look at, what happens within a country, that's useful. Like Poland after the Cold War put some strong pro-life laws in place, and abortions there fell dramatically. So one thing that just aggravates me is when people say the law doesn't matter. Those studies are really not worthwhile at all. The other thing
Yeah.
that gets on my nerves is when people claim that, you know, things other than pro-life activism are responsible for the abortion decline. There are people who say that the Affordable Care Act got abortion numbers down. And I point out,
Mm.
okay, the Affordable Care Act took effect around 2010, 2011. The abortion rate's been declining since 1980. It was declining for 30 years before this showed up. And some people will say contraceptives. Well, the thing is, it's true that more women use contraceptives today than maybe they did 40, 45 years ago, but unintended pregnancy rates haven't fallen much. They fluctuated. What we have seen is a big increase in the percentage of women who carry unintended pregnancies to term. And that flows back to
Mm.
pro-life efforts. If more women carry unintended pregnancies to term, that means that we've just persuaded them to do so, our education efforts. There's laws in place protecting them and their unborn child, legislation, or there's just more resources to support our pregnancy help centers. So education, legislation, service, all goes back to things that pro-lifers have worked hard on since the Roe v. Wade decision.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think another thing I'd be interested to talk about is contraception, kind of going off the book here, but along the similar lines with contraception and also with abortion pills now, I hear all the time from people saying there's no negative effects. It's safe. It's totally fine to take contraception. You're not going to have any problems with it. Same thing with the abortion pills. You're not going to have any problems. It's safer than Tylenol, things like that. What do the statistics say about those things? And do the statistics and the data, does that disprove some of those claims?
Well, when it comes to the abortion pill, I mean, even the FDA's own label indicates that roughly 1 in 25 women who obtain a chemical abortion and do so with proper medical supervision will suffer some serious adverse effect and may well end up in the hospital. And this is the FDA's own label, okay? So a 4% chance is pretty sizable. That's much greater than Tylenol. I'd also say that, if you compare abortion pills to Tylenol, that is a bad comparison. An abortion pill is taken by a woman, relatively young, who's probably otherwise good health. Tylenol is taken by a wide range of people, including elderly folks who are often in poor health. So you really can't make that comparison, at all. And, so again, the abortion pill has, risks involved. We have data that shows that complication rate for an abortion pill is 4 times the rate of a surgical abortion. That's looking at Medicaid data that's been published in peer-reviewed academic journals. And the fact that women can get these pills now through the mail without an in-person medical exam just escalates those risks. I mean, if a woman has an ectopic pregnancy and obtains a chemical abortion, that can be fatal. If she's further along in gestation, she realizes has a chemical abortion, that can have some very negative, serious health consequences. So that's the backstory on kind of chemical abortion. Contraception, I think, has a range of legitimate health concerns. I'm not really as well versed there, but a lot of the hormone treatments there are substantial and do increase the risk of various negative health outcomes. And I think that the research is there, but it's just kind of ignored.
Yeah, I think that that's very important, and this is kind of, proves the point that this isn't just an emotional, um, debate. This really does point back to statistics and to data because women do deserve informed consent, genuine informed consent, where they know that how these things are going to affect them. You mentioned the Guttmacher Institute. One of my favorite things that I've done when I've been talking to people who support abortion is to actually use statistics from the Guttmacher Institute. And then they try to argue with me about those statistics. And then I tell them, actually, it's from Guttmacher Institute, which was the research arm of Planned Parenthood. So you recently analyzed the latest data from Guttmacher Institute, and I'm sure you do this a lot. But what stood out to you most, and what do you think many headlines may have missed?
Once again, we're kind of in the Wild West right now when it comes to chemical abortions. I mean, unfortunately, telehealth abortions are legal. It was meant to be temporary, but a temporary measure of the pandemic. But the Biden administration continued this unwise policy of letting women get these pills through the mail without an in-person medical exam, and say the Trump administration continued this unwise policy. So tracking abortion numbers in a post-Dobbs world has been very difficult. And it's possible that some women just obtain these pills but just don't use them. They change their mind. There's anecdotes that some women obtain chemical abortion pills and store them for future use. So I will say the data is a lot less reliable than it used to be, but places like Guttmacher don't really acknowledge that. The one thing I will say is that we do have good data from them showing that those states that have gone ahead and passed some good pro-life laws lately are seeing abortion numbers go down. Florida did start to enforce a heartbeat law back, I guess, the spring of 2024. We did win on that ballot initiative that they didn't get the 60% they needed to put abortion in the state constitution. So the states are doing some good things with, pro-life laws recently, like Florida, like Iowa. They have seen abortion numbers go down.
Good. No, that's actually very encouraging, and it's not something that I knew about, I guess. I am obviously approaching abortion through a more, direct, support, lens with Let Them Live, and so I typically don't even, um, you know, bother too much with pro-life laws, not that they aren't great, and obviously you're showing me that they do have a huge effect, so I think that that's really amazing. Um, You've also spent a lot of time analyzing and studying Planned Parenthood's reports. I look at their annual reports every year, but from your perspective, you're someone who knows the numbers and knows the data and knows how to analyze these things. What trend in their numbers do you think deserves more public attention than it's getting?
But I think that it's the same thing every year with the report, that I could almost, write my blog post in my sleep. They always get more taxpayer dollars, and that's something people should be concerned about. That the most recent data did not include the defund that happened this past year, but they're getting more taxpayer dollars, both from the federal level and the state level. They Abortion numbers keep going up. They did over 400,000 abortions last year. They try to present themselves as a place that does healthcare, but their main business is abortion. I mean, it's true that, McDonald's might give you a napkin and a straw and a placemat. McDonald's sells hamburgers by and large. They're not a napkin dispenser. They're not a paper towel dispenser. So like Planned Parenthood does abortions. Are there some kind of other things on the side? Sure. But they are an abortion business. And, that's what the media needs to focus on. And also their data back it up that they're doing less and less of other kinds of healthcare, whether it's, cancer screenings. Uh, I think that deserves some attention as well. That if you look at other healthcare they claim to offer. They do less of that. They do very, very few adoption referrals. I mean, I think for every abortion they do, I think for every, let me rephrase it, for every adoption referral they do, they probably do maybe like 150 abortions. So they aren't really in the adoption business at all, or at least a serious way. The other thing that I think that deserves more attention, and I think is interesting, one thing that Planned Parenthood is getting more involved in is transgender treatments. But
Yes.
they don't really put that in their report. They will say their abortion numbers, but they won't list transgender, at least a number that just gets lumped into a miscellaneous category. They need money, they need revenue. I think with the federal defund last year, looking for additional sources of revenue. Transgender treatments are probably a source of revenue because people on these treatments will keep going back again and again to sadly get these hormone treatments. So that's something that should get more scrutiny. I don't know how we can coax Planned Parenthood to release numbers on that, but it's something that's concerning.
It is very concerning. I think you bring up a good point that Planned Parenthood really is in the business of exploiting people to make sure that they are keeping their revenue up. Funny enough, I'm not really sure why my mom received this, but she's been receiving some direct mail letters from Planned Parenthood, and I got the joy of opening one the other day. They're so desperate. They're so desperate for money, and I think you're right that they're gonna do whatever they need to do to make that happen, and sadly, like you said, I think I just wanna emphasize this, Planned Parenthood is an abortion business, regardless of what other things they provide, which they don't provide a lot of the things they like to think they do. It doesn't matter because abortion is their moneymaker, abortion is what they are known for, so I think that's very important. Um, I think we talked a little bit about this, but one of my questions was there's been a lot of debate about whether pro-life laws actually result in more children being born, and I think we've seen that the abortion numbers have gone down, so we can probably reasonably assume that, more children have been born, but based on your
We could
research into
definitely
was that?
we could definitely there's data on this that,
Okay,
you
perfect,
know,
yeah, so yeah, on your research into fertility and birth data since Dobbs, yeah, what conclusions can we draw?
well, sure. So basically, one thing I've told pro-life audiences is that in the post-Dobbs world, abortions are hard to count. Women go to other states, they can go to other countries, they may try to self-induce, they may get abortion pills with the mail. So abortions are hard to count. But babies are easy to count. They're hard to miss. They crawl, they cry, they make a lot of noise. The government doesn't do a lot of things super well, but it can count babies. They're hard to miss. So we have been looking at birth data to kind of gauge the impact of pro-life laws. And if we do see more births happening some 7 months after a pro-life law takes effect, we can be pretty confident that pro-life law is saving lives. That's exactly what we saw in Texas. Texas was the first state to really pass and enforce a strong pro-life law after Roe v. Wade. They passed a heartbeat law that took effect September of 2021, took effect before Dobbs. It was drafted in a very unique way that made it very resistant to legal challenges. And again, those unborn children that were not aborted in September were born in March. So starting in March, we saw an increase in the Texas birth rate. So I did a study for Lozier, two other studies. One appeared in a very prestigious public health journal. We all found the same thing. Looking at birth data, the Texas Heartbeat Act saved over 1,000 lives every month. So the birth data is very solid. I broke it down by counties, and that was interesting. I found that Texas counties near out-of-state abortion facilities, well, didn't have much impact. Like El Paso's near New Mexico. In New Mexico, abortion's legal, so it's not that hard for a woman from El Paso to go to New Mexico. Similarly, if a woman's in Tyler's close to Shreveport. At that time, abortion was legal in Louisiana. Law didn't do much there. But like the inland Texas counties, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, those places, you saw a big birth rate increase. So all of it, everything made sense. That we do know that the decision to obtain an abortion is based at least a little bit on economics. If you do raise the cost, women are less likely to obtain abortions. So that's good data there. There have been
Yeah.
other studies that have kind of looked at birth data from other states that passed strong pro-life laws that we've seen. One study that came out showed that in the first 6 months of 2023, 32,000 more children were born in pro-life states than what we'd expect. So tens of thousands of lives are being saved. And the other thing I'll say is that another study came out I talked about with a group yesterday showed that, birth numbers went up in pro-life states in the first part of 2003, but the impact diminished throughout the year. That was
Mm,
still doing some good, but it had a big impact January to June, but less of an impact July through December. Why?
mhm.
Sadly, telehealth. The law still does some good, but because of telehealth, women living in these states like Alabama, Mississippi, Texas can go online and get these pills mailed to them. So the laws are a little bit diminishing in their effect. They still do some good, but we
Right.
need to really do something about telehealth to really,
Yes.
protect mothers, protect children, and really build a culture of life.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. One of the biggest problems I think that we're seeing in the pro-life movement post Dobbs is this we don't really know the net impact. And I think that that is kind of the big thing. Like we can say, hey, there's been X amount more births, but because of the exporting of abortions from states that don't allow abortion to other states that do, like Colorado, for example, like New Mexico, and also telehealth, we really don't know who's having abortions, how many people are having abortions, these things like that. Not even to touch on the negative ramifications it has on women's health, like you mentioned at the beginning, like ectopic pregnancy and things like that. But I think that's a really big problem and that's a really big gap. Do you think that we ever will see a time where these things are more regulated? I mean, this has been a big issue right now. We're calling on the FDA to at least regulate some part of abortion pills being sent in the mail or just not being sent in the mail or just something so we can have a understanding of how this is impacting women and children and the birth rates, et cetera. So do you think we're going to see that at some point?
Point, but it may not be for a while. I mean, I think that I hate to say it, I think the Trump administration just thinks that limits on chemical abortions is a political loser. I think that Trump and his team want Republicans to keep control of the House and Senate in the 26 midterms. I think if
Mhm.
anything does happen, it may not happen until after the midterm elections take place. They're saying they're doing a study, but details are scarce. I do think that, as research does come out and the risks are made more evident, that will put some pressure on the FDA to do certain things. I'll also say that, the 2024 elections were kind of tough on pro-lifers in a way because we didn't have much leverage. Uh,
True.
Donald Trump said he wanted to be the Republican nominee. It was pretty much a signed deal. There wasn't much pro-lifers could do to help him. There wasn't really much we could do to hurt him. He was going to be the nominee. I think in future election cycles, you'll be more competitive. And, pro-lifers do have a lot of leverage in Republican presidential primaries. And I think we can get some promises from candidates running in those elections that, if you really want our votes, you really have to make a real visible commitment to putting some clamps on telehealth abortions. And
Sure.
obviously, these are competitive primaries. pro-lifers vote in big numbers. I think that, candidates we will have leverage in the future that we just didn't have this election cycle.
Yeah, no, for sure. And at the very least, we need to know the numbers. We need to know
Right.
how many women are actually having abortions and where they're happening. And in order to adjust our strategy and to adjust how we approach this. Perfectly enough, we started talking about telehealth abortions and mail order abortion drugs. Um, what does available research tell us about how this shift is affecting women's health and medical oversight?
Well, data is scarce, but I mean, what we do have is, the study done by the Ethics and Public Policy Center. They did seem to find some evidence that complication rates were rising, after telehealth became more common. They couldn't really sort out that study, telehealth versus, supervised, but just as telehealth became more prevalent, it just seemed that complication rates were in fact increasing. I think that you're going to see public health scholars get access to state Medicaid data, that will be made public at some point. Government agencies don't always release data in a real timely manner, which is a frustration for researchers like myself. But I think there will be data sets available from state Medicaid programs from elsewhere. And again, I am confident that, taking these pills unsupervised is terrible public health. Unfortunately, another problem we have is the FDA has really quit tracking complications with chemical abortions. They used to do this for a while. The only thing they they collect is deaths, sadly. All the other complications they've quit collecting data on. So that's
Mhm.
something the Trump administration could do tomorrow. I think it's common sense. I think if these pills
Yeah.
are legal, the very least you could do is come up with accurate data. And we do have data showing that women have died. That there've been hospitalizations. I don't have the data at my fingertips, but non-trivial numbers of women have been hurt by these pills, even when they are taken under proper supervision. So I think that more data is going to come out. One thing I will say is that if the data back you up, you will win. But corollary, sometimes winning takes a while.
Sure. Yeah, and I think someday though, and maybe this will be when I'm long gone, but someday, humanity will look back on this time and say, "What the heck were they doing?" Just like we look back on, pregnant women smoking cigarettes back in,
Mhm.
the 40s and
No,
the 50s, things
no,
like
there's all
that.
kinds of things.
Exactly. Some
Eugenics was very respectable at one point among elite circles, and now we're horrified.
and now we're
Uh,
horrified. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, for at one point, I hate to say it, like lobotomies were a fairly common medical practice, and rightfully so, we're horrified. So, I mean, just because something is commonly accepted, especially accepted by elites, does not mean it's correct, does not mean it's good public health. And yeah, I think we are going to look back on what went on at this point in time and just say, what were they thinking?
Yeah, what were they thinking? Why weren't they understanding how bad this was for them? Taking pills at home alone that you mailed, you got in the mail. I mean, it just seems really dumb. That as a culture we accept this. Um, this is kind of an interesting topic. Now we're still sticking on the abortion pill. I think that that's a really important thing. But your recent research actually suggests that even people who identify as pro-choice have concerns about abortion pill safety standards. Can you talk about that?
But I mean, there was been, research done about, telehealth abortion, what folks think. And most people are not really on board. Most people are rightfully concerned. And I don't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but it was a majority of Republicans, but like a non-trivial percent of Democrats were concerned about this. They really think unregulated chemical abortion pills are problematic. So again, I don't have the figures, but it was a strong majority had concerns about this, wanted to see proper regulation if they are in fact legal, and that cut across, a lot of demographic, a lot of ideological, and a lot of partisan groups.
Yeah, I can get on the same page. Like, obviously, I want it to go much further than just having regulations. But
Mhm.
I think that is a point where we can say, hey, with people who are pro choice or Democrat, like, I agree with you on that. Sure, we should at least be telling women, what the risks are or somewhat regulating this because, obviously, this is taking the life of a child in the womb, but it's also hurting these moms and these women. So I think that that's very important. And something else that I found was interesting. I think Students for Life has talked about this a lot, but the environmental impact that abortion pills have in flushing things in the toilet. On the broader population, I think is very interesting. So I think you're right that as we move forward, a lot of these things are going to come to light. And I think once data and once certain statistics come to light and studies and research pop up, it's going to be really hard to hide how damaging abortion pills are in the future. So I definitely agree with you about that. We've talked a lot about statistics, and I think most that was like one of my worst classes in college. I'd rather take calculus over and over again than do statistics, but I think a lot of people might find statistics a little bit intimidating. So, can you talk a little bit about how the average pro lifer can use some of your research when talking to people who oppose their pro life beliefs?
Sure, I just think that, data kind of backs up a lot of things that we say, that I think if you look at good, well done studies, we have good research that shows that, pro life laws, a range of laws are effective at reducing abortion rates and resulting in more pregnancies being carried to term. I think even, Guttmacher acknowledges this. They won't yell from the rooftop if you read their publications carefully. They acknowledge that, laws do have some impact. I think we do have good research showing that, chemical abortion pills do pose risks. The FDA does have a list of, women who've, not names, but numbers of women who've died, numbers of women who've had other kind of negative adverse effects because of chemical abortion pills. The data, you don't just need to sift through, academic journals, but the important thing is that don't believe the media spin. The media is very good at just spinning certain things. They don't read the whole study. And that's, kind of a source of frustration for me. And I'm lucky to have outlets like National Review, and we're lucky to have Life News and Life Site News and Live Action News that do present a pro life perspective on these things. But the one thing that just I always encourage people to do is, read the entire study. Don't just read what the reporter said or thought was important. A lot of times it's more nuanced, and a lot of times what the reporter's saying is just out and out misleading.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And don't be intimidated. This is, for everyone. Don't be intimidated by all the numbers. And you don't have to be a statistician to, know the numbers or just to have a couple of things in your mind that back up your arguments. I think for me, and I'm sure you would say the same thing, Dr. New, that the statistics really back up the pro life position. And I think that that's really incredible. And so just kind of knowing already going into a conversation with anyone who disagrees with you, you know that you have the numbers to back up your position, and it's probably good to have a few in your back pocket. I also know that there's great resources. You can share some more as well, if you have any. But AAPLOG, that's the American Association of Pro Life OBGYNs. They have really great like printouts and things like that on their website with data that you can just look to, and it's really great to have. But where would people go to kind of do that research, back up their pro-life beliefs and figure out how to take that out into the world?
Would say, places like A-Plog, places like the Charlotte Lozier Institute. I try to have good information on my social media feeds. So if your listeners want to follow me on X or Twitter, I'm at Michael_J_new. And I think there's a lot of just good talking points you can keep in your back pocket about abortion rates falling by 50% since 1980. That's useful. I also tell people that um, there's always concerns about pro-life laws and public health. Well, the country in Europe, at least among the large population countries, has the lowest maternal mortality rate is Poland. Poland also among the large countries is the best and strongest pro-life laws. So Poland is, I think, done a lot of good in terms of protecting preborn children. Public health outcomes are very good. Ireland up until 2016, 2017 was protecting preborn children. Before they legalized abortion, their public health laws, public health outcomes are very good. Many respects better than those of Wales or England or Scotland. So, pro-life, is pro-health. Don't let people, you have to choose one or the other. It's both and, not either or. We can love them both.
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot. And obviously, you've been doing this a long time. You've been studying trends and abortion policy. What gives you the most hope right now?
What gives me the most hope is that the long-term progress we've made. I mean, we have got the abortion rate down by more than 50% since 1980, and did so while abortion was still legal. I think that, the post-Dobbs world, things haven't quite played out the way we thought they might.
Are you
But I will say that every generation of pro-lifers has different challenges they face. The challenge facing this generation is, frankly, telehealth abortions. That's kind of our battle to fight. So, we've been at this for a while. We were never promised, a smooth glide path to victory. There's going to be disappointments, aggravations, setbacks. We have good arguments. We have the truth on our side. We see a lot more young people getting involved. That gives me a lot of hope. I know that one thing I did, I guess, about a year or 2 ago, I had a chance to give a talk in Mississippi, and I spent some time at the Civil Rights Museum there. And a
Mhm.
lot of what you read in history books about the Civil Rights Movement is incomplete. It was not a smooth glide path. It didn't go from Rosa Parks to the March on Washington to ending segregation. They had disappointments, they had setbacks, they had frustrations, but they always, stayed principled and they never gave up. And I think the one thing that really gives me hope about the pro life movement is that we've not been perfect. We've made mistakes here and there, but as a movement, we've never given up. We've
Yeah.
never, ever given up. So
Yeah.
that's really what gives me a lot of hope.
That's so encouraging, and speaking of that, kinda wanna shift gears. We talked a lot about the statistics and kind of the academic aspects of your work, but you are on the sidewalk in DC faithfully, consistently, and I just love that you do that. You offer help to so many women who are walking into that DC abortion clinic. Um, so can you talk a little bit about what, um, caused you to start doing sidewalk advocacy?
Yeah, sure. That again, I had been doing a lot of writing and research on the pro-life movement. One thing that had always interested me a little bit was the history of the movement. And to be
Mhm.
honest, we've as a movement we've not done as good a job as we could have really tracking our history. And around 2006, 2007, I found myself reading a book called Wrath of Angels. It's about the direct action wing of the pro-life movement. It's about Operation Rescue and what preceded that. It's not a very good book. It's not sympathetic to our side, but it does kinda tell you who was doing what, where, when. And I just had, like, an insight, reading this book that if abortion is as wrong and as unjust and as evil as I think it is, I can't be flying a desk all day long. I really have to be out there where things are taking place. And it was interesting. I thought, I was a teacher at University of Alabama at the time. There was an abortion facility in Tuscaloosa, and I was thinking about going out there, but I was terrified. I was on the tenure track at University of Alabama. I was concerned, what if I run into a student out there? What if I run into a staff member out there? What if they file a complaint against me? There's things that could conceivably go wrong. But I also kind of realized, Michael, if God's calling you to do something, He's going to take care of you. The most important
True.
thing isn't satisfying your callings, your deed, it's satisfying God. So I was the faculty advisor to the pro life group out there. We were invited to do some kind of a prayer vigil outside this abortion facility. I thought, I'll just go because you're the faculty advisor. On the very odd chance something goes wrong, just say you were there to support the students and you're the faculty advisor of a group that was just doing a prayer vigil. Nothing wrong, nothing illegal. And I show up there and I'm praying. I'm like, wait, this isn't that hard. I can do this. I can stand outside this facility and pray. So that got me started. And it's kind of interesting. I was a faculty advisor to the Pro Life Group, University of Alabama. Around 2010 or 2011, they signed me up to run a 40 Days for Life campaign. They didn't tell me.
Oh.
They informed me this after the fact. And I was annoyed. I'm like, guys, we're a small campus group. We can't cover all the hours. And no, it wasn't the perfect campaign by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a good campaign. We did a
Sure.
lot of outreach. We talked to pastors and Knights
Mhm.
of Columbus agreed to take a day. And it was a little bit haphazard, but we did get people out in front of the clinic praying. And that was a net step forward. So
Oh, yeah.
my interest in sidewalk counseling in some respects has been kind of contingent on where I've been and how how many other people are doing it. Michigan had a pretty strong. I was there for a while. They had a lot of people on the sidewalk, so I scaled back a little bit there. I was living in Florida. I was living far away from any abortion facility I went, but maybe not quite as faithfully. But then I came to Washington D.C in August of 2018 to start this position at the Catholic University of America. And I move in, I'm getting unpacked. It's sometime in the fall. I wake up, it's a Saturday. I run some errands. I get done quickly. I check my phone. It's still early. I get this idea. Why not go to the DC Planned Parenthood, help out the pro life people? I've been to DC before, and we used to have a lot of people at the Planned Parenthood, like 20, 30 people.
Wow.
So I thought there'd be a big contingent. I show up. There's only 2 people there who are pro-life, and I couldn't believe it. I'm like, "Where'd everybody go?" Well, the clinic moved, and some folks didn't like the fact there was like a tent city of homeless people nearby, and some folks just were ill, and some folks moved away or aged out, and we need more than 2 people. So I'm like, "Michael, you have a standing appointment here. Every Saturday morning, you're gonna be here praying and sidewalk counseling,
I
and
love
you're gonna
that.
try to
The
get other people to help
standing
you."
appointment, because that's what we
Yep.
should do as pro-life people. We should have standing appointments. If you are near to an abortion clinic, I just came back to Colorado and my plan is to go. I'm traveling, but my plan is to go to the abortion clinic and have a standing appointment there. I think that's great, Michael. Yeah.
So I, you know basically, someone sent me a mailing list. I mailed it out. Some folks wanted to get lost. I took them off the list. I went to Catholic young adult groups and meetings. I recruited people. We did get a 40 Days for Life campaign started. That attracted some people, and the world didn't bang down at my door, but bit by bit, people started to come. And right now,
But
we're very blessed that we have actually two young ladies who are full-time pro-life missionaries with survivors of the abortion Holocaust who are in full-time pro-life work in D.C. So, the street sidewalk ministry has really devolved and developed, and I'm very proud of it.
that's amazing. I really love that. I've been to that abortion clinic before. I've prayed outside of it. I've offered resources. It's really sad, you guys, and it is hard. I think sometimes it can, in some ways, it's easy because it just means you show up to the abortion clinic. But it can be hard because you are coming outside of your shell. It's one thing to say you're pro life. It's one thing to post about it online and maybe even engage in debates, within your family. It's an entirely different thing to put your body outside of an abortion clinic and to give hope to women and to kind of battle off the enemy. So I think that that's really encouraging. And I'm just want to say too, I'm so grateful for your support of Let Them Live. We for everyone listening should know what Let Them Live does at this point. But obviously, we work a lot with sidewalk advocates. Who are, witnessing women going into the Planned Parenthood, into the abortion clinics, and giving them our resource and saying, hey, these people can help you. So I just want to ask you, what is it about Let Them Live that resonates with you personally?
I just find that a lot of times there are people who are seeking abortion that just need a little bit of short-term help. Their situation isn't horrible or dire. They just need help with a rent payment or they need to get a car fixed. And, sometimes, there are organizations that are willing to help, but sometimes they're reluctant to ask or just don't know about it. And sometimes just a relatively small donation can make a big difference. I know that we were doing a vigil outside Planned Parenthood, I guess, a few years ago. It was during the pandemic year. So instead of doing the march, people just came and prayed outside the Planned Parenthood. We probably had a couple hundred people there, and we encountered a woman who just needed some financial help, and we passed her out a hat at this rally, and we raised almost exactly the amount she needed. It was very providential. So again, sometimes you don't need an enormous budget. You don't necessarily need to. Sometimes people just need some short term help to get through a rough financial patch, and places like Let Them Live do a great job in providing. So I've seen many situations where someone just needed some help with an expense, and once that expense is covered, they can kind of go on with their life and continue the pregnancy and raise a happy, healthy child.
Yeah, it's really amazing what a little bit of help will do and how far a
Yes.
little bit of help goes. Like you said, sometimes it really does come down to a couple of rent payments or fixing
Yes.
their car or whatever it is. And so I'm grateful to you guys for being out there and for referring women to us and for anyone who's, at a pregnancy resource or resource center or, out on the sidewalk. Make sure you reach out to us because we can really partner and make sure to help these moms. And I know that you had mentioned this, but I want to make sure we mention it again. Where can people go who are listening and watching to follow you, to follow what you're doing on the sidewalk, to keep up to date on the latest, research about abortion and all of that?
Keep up with me is through my Twitter/X account. Again, at Michael Michael _J _new NEW. So if you follow me on Twitter, you can, reach out to me that way. Also, Instagram's the same handle at Michael _J _new. I can be reached out on Instagram. Those are the best ways to kind of keep up with, writing, research, and street level activism. The relatively near future, I will be probably launching some kind of a Substack to kind of organize what I write and talk about more coherently. So, I'll be publishing that on my social media feed. So stay tuned for that. But that's the best way to keep up with me.
Awesome. Yeah, and also check out National Review, you guys. Like he's written for them, and Charlotte Lozier Institute is a really amazing place for lots of information. A plug, but there's really so much information that is out there that can really back our pro life views. So thank you again, Dr. New, for hopping on, and I really appreciate all of your wisdom and for what you do on the sidewalk every Saturday.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated. Keep the great work building a culture of life.
Thank you for tuning in to the Let Them Live podcast with Emily Burning. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.